It seems as if there's a resurgence on our hands, or a movement, if you will, away from the traditional photographic compositions of horizontal and vertical, otherwise known as landscape and portrait orientations, and to the more balanced and, I guess my personal favorite, a one-to-one square composition. And the two most common questions I get regarding why I often use a square crop is, one, do I only do it for Instagram? And I guess the short answer is no. I don't really do anything specific just for Instagram. And actually, I would never change an entire image to fit any social media platform. And the second question is, how do you know when a square crop is the right choice? Which is an absolutely fantastic question, and one that I'll discuss in this video, all about I guess the quiet power of a square crop and why you should start experimenting with it today. But before we jump into I guess the do's and the don'ts related to square cropping, it's first important to understand exactly how the human eye views photos that are in a horizontal versus a vertical orientation. So this, as you can see, this is a new image from my recent trip to Colorado, and you can obviously see that this is in a landscape or a horizontal orientation. And I would highly recommend at the end of this video, go through this little experiment with your own photos and just pay attention to how you view your images that are in a horizontal versus a vertical orientation. It's pretty interesting to see. So for this particular image, like I mentioned, horizontal orientation, your eye naturally starts from the left side and moves to the right side. And the reason it does that is because those are where the dominant edges of a horizontal composition are. The longest edges are on the top and the bottom, and they run from left to right or right to left. And in this particular image, your eye wants to start over here on the left side, at least my eye does, and it kind of naturally follows a lot of the brighter areas of these colors, and it also follows these mountains here. So your eye is pretty much going to start from the left side and move to the right, and then move from the right and move to the left, and it's all predicated on the fact that the top and the bottom, these are where the longest edges of this frame actually are. So your eye naturally wants to follow that dominant edge, or whatever edge is longest in a particular composition. Another example here, this is a more obvious example of this, but once again, a landscape or a horizontal orientation, and your eye naturally wants to follow definitely the brightest area here, but it's going to start on the left side and move to the right, and move from the right to the left, and your eye's going to kind of bounce back and forth, and that's how it's going to view a horizontal or a landscape orientation. So it's going to start at either the left or the right side, and it's just going to kind of go back and forth. Now, on the opposite side of the equation, a vertical image, or an image that is captured in a portrait orientation, is going to start either from the bottom and work its way to the top, or start from the top and work its way to the bottom. And the reason is because this is where the dominant edges are. So it's on the left side and on the right side, and that's going to be where the eye is naturally going to follow. So opposite of the horizontal orientation, its dominant edge is no longer on the top and the bottom. It's now on the left and the right side, going up and down. And that's how the human eye is naturally going to view a vertical composition. So in this particular image, when I look at it, my eye immediately goes right to this rock, and then starts to go back up to the top, and then go from the top and go back down to the bottom. Another example of this right here, this is got very, very strong vertical lines. So you have this waterfall here that's pouring down, obviously, and then you have these tree trunks that are going up or going down, versus however you want to look at it. But ultimately, when you look at this photograph, your eye more than likely is going to start from the bottom and go to the top, or go from the top and go to the bottom. And that's basically, or specifically, or that's because the eye wants to follow the dominant edge of a frame, or the longest side. And that's very, very important to understand. So for a horizontal or landscape orientation, the eye is going to follow that from the left to the right, or the right to the left. For a vertical composition or a portrait composition, the dominant edges are on the left and the right, and the eye is naturally going to start from the bottom and go to the top, or from the top to the bottom. But when you get to a square crop, there are no dominant edges. All sides are created equal. So the left side is the same distance as the right side, and the top is the same distance as the bottom, and the top is the same distance as, you get what I'm saying. All sides are equal in a square. So when there's no dominant edge, what does the eye do? And it's pretty interesting. So for this particular image right here, since there is no dominant edge, there's no edge for the eye to lock onto, it is said that the eye naturally just wants to circle the frame, which is very, very interesting. So instead of the eye moving left to right, right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top, the eye just kind of circles around, and that creates a very kind of a stable photograph. So in this particular image, you can see that it goes all the way around from the left to the right, or right to the left, depending on however your eye is actually viewing this particular photograph. And for this particular scene, when I look at this, my eye just naturally just wants to just circle around this starfish. You know, the water kind of flowing around it definitely helps, but since there's just not that dominant edge to track, your eye just kind of just wanders around here. And when you really kind of start to pay attention to the way the human eye interacts with a composition or a crop, it really helps you to identify certain scenarios to use certain types of crops. Here's another example right here where the eye, obviously, when I first look at this photograph, I stare right at this mushroom, but my eye just kind of circles around a lot of this negative space right through here. And I personally find these kind of square crops to create a very kind of simplistic or very stable composition or a stable environment for the eye to kind of just circle and kind of wander. And it feels like a very almost relaxing type of a photograph to look at. And I think that that is very, very powerful. Now, as far as when do you use a square crop, that's a very, very, very interesting question. It's a very important question. And I think it's something that you really have to understand in order to use a square crop in the most effective manner as possible. And this image right here is a perfect example of one of the I guess 4 main reasons that I see to use a square crop. And this is a good example of it. Basically, images that have good symmetry. So images that you can basically cut in half in any particular way, and each side is going to look very similar. And in this image, it's a perfect example of it. Plus, there's a lot of repeating shapes throughout the image. And I think that when you have photographs that have good symmetry, good repeating shapes, that is a fantastic opportunity to possibly test out a 1-to-1 square crop. Another good example right here, lots of repeating shapes, lots of good symmetry. If we were to cut this image right across this diagonal area, the bottom image, the bottom portion and the top portion would look very, very identical. So it's a pretty symmetrical, pretty balanced and harmonious and kind of a peaceful photograph. Another good example right here of just repeating shapes all through here, the water. Another example here, repeating shapes all through the background right through here. And this is kind of leads me to my next, real benefit of a good square crop is whenever you have a center weighted composition. A square crop is absolutely fantastic because if you remember, the eye is going to naturally wander around the scene. So when you have your subject in the center, that's a great opportunity for the viewer's eye to just circle the subject, which is always a fantastic or a beautiful thing when you can draw the viewer's eye into the center of your photograph and away from the edges of your scene. And this is a great example of this from Moab. This cliff face right in the center of the scene. All of this around here is all negative space, and the eye just wants to just kind of circle around this area in different directions. Another example, back to that mushroom, perfect example of this. Lots of negative space around the subject, and the eye just wants to follow right through here. And then, of course, there's the other one. This kind of goes in line with harmonious and balanced photographs and symmetrical images, but whenever there's strong diagonal lines, it's another great use case for using a square crop. An image I shared on Instagram not too long ago, I think this is a great use case for a square crop where you have this very strong dominant diagonal line through this photograph. One more example right through here, very strong dominant area right through here, creates that very symmetrical image, but that diagonal is a great opportunity to use a square crop to really emphasize that the diagonal nature of the image, which also creates a very symmetrical photograph as well. Now, I think probably one of my favorite reasons, or I should say, things that I notice in my own images where I might want to start to experiment with a 1-to-1 square crop is when there's a lot of ineffective, I guess negative, I don't want to say it's negative space, let's just call it ineffective space in an image that doesn't really add any value to a photograph. Because when I'm analyzing my own images, I'm always asking myself, does this area add value to the photograph? And if it doesn't, I want to crop it out or remove it or darken it down so it doesn't draw as much attention from the viewer. And I think this is a great example of this, where this is the way I captured it. And I don't really love the photograph, but I definitely didn't like it in this orientation. And when I started to play with different cropping ideas, I found out that, this area, or I came to the conclusion that this area doesn't really add a whole lot of value. This area doesn't add a whole lot of value. It's not very effective negative space. So if we come over here to 1-to-1 and just add a square crop to it, kind of center it up right there, I think that right there creates a more simplistic and a more stable, and it creates more, better balance and better flow, because once again, this is more of a center weighted composition now, and the viewer's eye is just kind of left to just kind of wander around and just kind of circle this area right through here. And I think that this looks much more powerful. And this is a great example here where, as you can imagine, everything to the left over here and everything to the right over here was just more chaotic woodland area, and it certainly was not adding any value to this photograph. But by putting on this square crop and creating a much more focused image, I think that this definitely works much, much better versus having a lot of that ineffective area to the left and to the right. So paying attention to the areas that are not creating value to your photograph is another great, I guess maybe leading indicator as to whether or not you should use a square crop. And I do want to preface or say something real quick that I don't think there is any kind of hard and fast rule of yes, you should use a square crop or no, you should not use a square crop in this situation. I think that there's just certain signals that would help you identify whether or not this is a high or a likelihood of a good candidate to add a square crop to a photograph, and then apply it and see if you like it, move it around a little bit. You might not like it, but I think there's definitely certain scenarios that are worth experimenting. Now, I think this image right here is a fantastic representation of when you might not want to do a square crop. And from my experience, and this, like I said, not a hard and fast rule, but when I find that when images have very strong left to right flow or right to left flow, those usually are not the best, in my opinion, to create or to apply a square crop. And I'll show you exactly what I mean right here. As you can see, there's very, very strong horizontal flow from the left to the right and the right to the left of this photograph. Very simplistic image. If I come down here and let's go to 1:1 and add a square crop and close that, you don't really get that same flow from left to right. It almost feels like it lost a lot of that balance. It almost feels like it lost a lot of that flow in the overall photograph. And I think that this right here emphasizes that left to right motion much, much better. Another example of this right here where there's very, very strong left to right flow and right to left flow in this particular image. Come down here, let's add a 1:1 square crop for this one and hit enter. And once again, this just doesn't quite do it for me as much because you lose that left to right flow and there's no dominant edge for the eye to follow. So your eye just kind of just bounces all over the place. And when I look at this photograph, my eye doesn't really have an area to comfortably rest, and this image feels a little bit more tense now versus when it was in that pure horizontal or landscape orientation. And once again, on the flip side, photographs that have strong vertical lines, a lot of times these aren't the best scenarios either, but it's definitely worth experimenting. Come down here to 1:1 just to check it out. So maybe just lower this a little bit and hit enter. That doesn't look too bad, but it loses that vertical nature of these aspens, and I kind of like that top to bottom, bottom to top, I guess, feeling that this image provided for the viewer. And I really like that at least my eye naturally goes through here, analyzes the fence, looks all through here, sees the sunburst, sees this beautiful color. And I like that top to bottom, bottom to top kind of reviewing of this type of a photograph. Once again, here's another very obvious example of this. Very, very strong vertical lines. We come over here, 1:1. Yeah, I don't think that looks horrible, but I think it looks okay, really. But I think that I like the more vertical aspect of it because I feel like there's more for the eye to follow. I feel like it has a little bit more flow when the eye can follow those dominant edges and start from the top and go to the bottom, or from the bottom into the top. Now, as far as scenarios that aren't quite as obvious, this is a good example of it where the waterfall is naturally coming from the top and dropping straight down. So that's good vertical flow. But then you have these lines going to the left and to the right and the right and to the left. So you kind of got vertical and horizontal. So what do you kind of do in this particular scenario? I would highly recommend that if you want to check it out, just put that quick 1:1 crop on there and just move it around and see if it does add any additional value. Maybe it removes an area that you don't particularly like, or an area that's not adding value to the photograph. But for me, I really like seeing the water crashing into the bottom pool here. I really like this rainbow up here. So I think the top and the bottom definitely add value to the photograph. So I wouldn't want to crop any of those areas out. And then one final example here, you definitely have good left to right flow and right to left flow. It's in a landscape or a horizontal orientation. So you have the dominant edge over here and up here. So the eye does want to follow it from the left to the right. And you have these nice white aspens right through here. 1, 2, 3, but they're actually going obviously trees are in a vertical orientation. So they're going up and down. So this image kind of has a lot going on. It's in a horizontal orientation, but the subject matter is vertical. So what do you do in this particular scenario? So I've already tried this. Come up here, drop it down, 1:1. Putting it in here, but the composition's too tight. There's no way to really comfortably do this. And this image now feels a little bit too claustrophobic. Everything feels like it's just too squished together. So I definitely don't think that this works as well as a horizontal or a landscape orientation does. So paying attention to those clear signals as to when a square crop is something that you should experiment with is definitely very, very powerful. And understanding exactly how the viewer's eye sees photographs versus a horizontal orientation or a vertical orientation or even a square crop. Just knowing that right there will completely change the way that you look at cropping your photos moving forward. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I highly encourage you to just go review some of your own photographs, but really pay attention to how you see those photographs. Pay attention to where's the very, very first place your eye goes, where's the last place your eye goes, where does your eye rest in a particular image, and just pay attention to the way that I should say that visual flow, or the way that your eye tracks throughout an image. That's super, super powerful stuff. So I hope that was something that will help you moving forward when it comes to trying to determine exactly how to or what type of a crop you might want to apply to a specific image, and how a viewer might view that photograph based off of the crop that you do apply. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments section below. I'll do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as possible. If you enjoyed the video, if you could, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, share the photo with, I always say that, share the video with your friends or your local photo club. I definitely would appreciate it. And as always, I really appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to spend it with me today. And I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.